Well, hello and welcome to Midweek Conversations. My name is Elise and I'm one of the pastors on staff here at New Life. We are so excited that you have joined us in this conversation. Do us a favor, go ahead and like this video and share this video so that we can get more people to jump in on the conversation with us.
Yep.
If you have a question about this week's message, you can actually text the word question to the number on the screen to submit that question to us so that we can go ahead and jump into that next week. And we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can through that. But today we are excited because we are going to be talking about flipping the script from rules to relationship with Pastor Ryan.
No more
Hello,
rules.
Pastor Ryan.
Yeah.
No anarchy. We talked about that. We are excited to kick off this combo with a very heated topic,
Yeah.
and that is you talked about the rules of Uno.
Yeah.
And you talked about Uno came in and they clarified that. At that moment, were you heartbroken that they'd clarified the rule about stacking?
No, because, and so, by the way, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, in 2019, Uno clarified a rule that was very different depending on what house you were playing in or what group you're playing in. And that is if somebody drops a draw two card on you and makes you draw two cards or four cards if it's a draw four, you could play another draw card that would then pass that to the person next and it would stack it on. So it'd be like if I got a draw two, I could put a draw two on there and now you got to draw four and then you put a draw four and they got to draw eight and that thing goes on forever.
Awful.
Awful.
It's awful.
Heaven help the person who has to draw 12 cards.
It's usually like the 6-year-old in the group and then
Yeah.
they start crying.
And that's it. So I'd never heard of that before in my life until I sat down with my brother-in-law and my nephew like over the holidays, and he was like cracking his knuckles, getting ready. He's like, "This is how we do it," and it was just this like intense game. And I was like, "Man!" So when that rule came out, I was like, "Okay, I'm cool," because two things. Again, with cards, I'm super competitive, but I don't want anybody to know I'm competitive. So I need as
Right.
much of an edge as I can
don't
get.
care.
I don't
I
care. It's
just-
cool. Whatever helps.
I win all the time. It's just so it happens all the time. I don't care anymore. Yeah, I've learned that when you go to people's houses to play like card games or board games and you learn their house rules, it's like friend shattering.
Oh,
Like
man.
relationships die over house rules.
Exactly.
That is the worst place. So, at the beginning of your message, you talked about the history of the people of God. So, can you go ahead and give us a little brief synopsis of that history and why it's important for us to begin the conversation there?
Yeah. So in Christianity, we always, people want to know what are the rules, like what is a sin, what's not a sin, all that kind of stuff. And for a while, I mean, God's relationship was follow me only, and then like that was it. But when He took His people out of slavery and into freedom, He said, I'm going to establish this covenant with you. I'm going to be your God. I'm going to take care of you, give you everything. And here's what this covenant will look like on your end. This is the 10 Commandments. You're going to, the first part of that 10 Commandments all relates to how we relate to God. And then the second part of that 10 Commandments was how do we relate to people? That's why it's like don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery, all these things. So this seemed pretty simple. But there were 613 other laws called the mitzvot that were all related to still how we live our lives out. And part of that is because as people, you give us 10 rules and we're going to go, well, okay, but that's pretty vague. I mean, technically, you're saying don't covet your neighbor's stuff, but like what if your neighbor has too much stuff and like you don't have enough? And so like that's not wrong, is it? And don't steal. Well, I know I didn't steal. It was just laying there and nobody had claimed it. Don't kill. Well, it was self-defense. Like there's just all these ways that we would, bend the rules. And so there was this other not document, but a collection of writings from rabbis and things. It was called the Talmud. And it had thousands of codes. And these codes actually had like exceptions and exemptions and specific ways. For example, you were supposed to rest on the Sabbath. Okay, that makes sense. Take a day off. But then it was like, well, what is a day off? I mean, what's working, what's not working? And so 39 categories of work that was like, don't tie a knot, don't untie a knot, don't make two loops, don't sew two threads together, don't tear two threads apart, don't carry this thing that far, don't light a fire. It was because everybody was like, well, that's work. No, it's not work. Yes, it is. You know what? Let's make a rule. That counts as work. And that doesn't count as work. And it got so convoluted and just difficult to deal with that people just started dividing up into groups, and that's where the Pharisees and the Sadducees and these other groups come out of. It's all about who does it better, who does it best, and that was what legalism was. So God was, and in the meantime, God's like, I was just trying to tell you how to relate to me.
Just trying to help guys. That's why I love that you tell the story about, is it Weston who jumped off
Yeah.
the roof? That most rules exist because somebody messed up, and so now that rule exists,
Yeah.
right? And it's
Oh,
like,
man.
oh man, I loved going on the roof just to look at the stars, but now Weston had to come ruin everything by jumping off of it,
Yeah.
and so now there's a rule.
And that's, you can Google like weird laws, and there's like certain towns where like it's illegal to make fun of a horse on a Sunday. Like
Yeah.
just weird, like what happened? Somebody did something, somebody didn't like it, we had to make a rule about it.
Right.
So,
But in your message, you shift talking about how that legalism that we carry, where we want to enforce those rules, can actually become something that's really destructive.
yeah.
And you actually highlight the two destructive expressions or results of that legalism, that it feeds the ego, but it starves the heart, or it feeds the ego and crushes the soul.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of bad news, right? And I was even upset because I thought I was a rule follower, and I raised my hand for rule follower, but then you introduced rule bender, and I was like, oh no. I use the word technically a lot,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that bad news can feel overwhelming, but that's why we're doing this series,
Yep.
is to look at the bad news and to look at how Jesus came to flip the script. And you talked in Matthew 11:28 through 30, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Remind us again the three things that passage highlights for us.
Yeah. So in there, Jesus says, "Come to me, learn from me, and take my burden upon you." Like those three things. So, or be yoked to me. Go where I go, do what I do. So in none of that does he excuse our bad behavior.
Right?
And none of that does he say, "Oh, you don't. These rules don't matter." In fact, Jesus said, and I probably could have added this in. He said, "I didn't come to change or erase one letter from the law. I came to fulfill the law." And I think we argue a lot about what that even means. Like, what does that mean? Oh, it means he totally nullified. No, he said he didn't. He said all these rules still apply in certain ways, but he said don't lose the heart of the law for the letter of the law. And so come to me. If you're weary, if you're burdened, if you can't break free from this, I think here's the thing. So we'll go one at a time. Come to me. My gut reaction when I'm sinning is not to come to Jesus. It's to stay
Right.
away from Jesus.
Yes.
And then go, "Jesus, I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to go fix some stuff. I'll be back later on."
Don't you worry, I got it covered.
I figured it all out.
Go do something else. I'll take care of it.
And that's actually what it was. It was like, "Lord, thank you for these rules. We'll take it from here." And then I can't do it. So I'm hiding. Like you said in part 2, we're hiding from our shame and our sin. And so Jesus is like, "Just come to me. Like get this monkey off your back. Just come to me and do what, and just be in relationship with me first. The next is learn from me." And I think but he says, "I'm gentle and humble in heart." So when we read the word of God, we don't read judgment upon ourselves. What we read is, this is the character of God. And this is where I line up with it. So, or don't. And I had a mentor once who said, whenever we approach scripture, we should approach from, how does this reveal the character of God? How does this reveal my character in contrast? Like, where am I struggling with this? And then how is it revealing the way that I can bridge that gap, or the way that God bridges that gap? So learn from me means you should be hungry for the word. You should be in the word. The written word, the Bible, tells us about the living word of God. So we want to learn from him.
Well, and I love those three questions that you just talked about from your mentor, because even this last week, my group was talking about how maybe sometimes we're reading the Bible just to go through the motions, but we're not actually learning from it. Mm-hmm. And so even those three questions that you just listed about the Bible, that would be a great way to like start in prayer over reading. Like, Lord,
Right.
Would you use this time to convict me of where my ways don't align with yours? Would you use this time to teach me about your heart? And so I love that you highlighted those.
Yeah. What is this saying about God? I'll say it one more time. What is this saying about the character and the goodness of God? What is it saying in contrast about my character or my struggle or my sin? And then in there also is, okay, God, what are you wanting to do in me to close that gap? Because, and by the way, I think it needs to be, what are you wanting to do in me?
Yes.
Because it's like, oh,
I have my own agenda every time.
God's good, I'm not. Got it. Okay, I'll take it from here. Just be more good. Like, that's not what it means. It's learn from me. And then that's where he says, take on my yoke, which is to take on his yoke doesn't mean that we take his yoke off of him and put it on ourselves. It means he's got this other, like, the yoke is a two-person thing. It's a one ox yoked to another ox. So Jesus is like, I've got the yoke. Come get yourself in here, be connected to me. And now you're just going to go where I go. You're going to do what I do. And my burden is easy. All the law, all the prophets, all the commands, they all boil down to love me with everything you got. And then love people the way that you love yourself and would care for yourself. Just do to others what you would want done for you. It's the golden rule, right? But it actually covers all the rules.
Right. Yeah, and I think what makes maybe legalism so attractive, and I don't think any of us would stand up and say, yep, I'm a legalist. Like we wouldn't self-identify as that. But I think what maybe makes it so attractive is it feels so crystal clear and concise. Like love God and love each other can feel confusing, right? Well, what does loving God look like in this situation, It's not that super clear, like I want the checklist, I want the rules, and I want to be able to follow them and be like, wear that badge of honor. Like I followed the rules, right? Mm-hmm. Love God, love neighbor is more ambiguous.
Well, and if I can make a rule fit within what I'm trying to do already selfishly, then it's like, oh, it's not that I don't love you. It's just these are the rules.
Right. Right. And I love that you're going to have to say it again for me. It's simple, but it's.
Oh, so I say it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yes.
Or I say like it's hard, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we complicate it. So do you want to unpack a little bit? Why do you think we complicate the matter?
Sure. Well, it's the reason why we complicate it, and the reason why it is so hard is because even though love is a simple law, it attacks the most powerful force in our lives apart from God, and that is our own selfishness. Mm-hmm. Like the Bible talks about this war between the flesh and the spirit. So if Holly's like, hey, can you help me out? I have a doctor's appointment, and I need you to come home early and watch the twins. But I was going to try to get some work done. And I have the freedom to do that because I can flex my schedule a little. And I'm like, oh, if I was to ask, well, what would love do? It's like, I know what love would do. Love would say, put this on the back burner and go help Holly. And so I don't want to do that because it's not that I don't want to serve Holly. It's that I don't want to not serve me. And so that happens in every relationship, or even in our relationship with God. Okay, God, do you want me to get drunk on Friday night? I really want to, but do you want me to? No, and I love you, so I'm trusting you. Fine, but it's easier for me just to go the other way, or to come up with any kind of bending of the rule or any loophole where it technically doesn't count. So I think that's why, even though love is simpler, it's harder, and that's why we have 10 million rules. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I love that you ask that question at the very end of the message of what does love require of me? I know we've used that here a few times before at New Life, and it is so, like, you hear it and it's exciting, like, yeah, that's such a fun question. But then when you go to actually apply using that in your life, you're like, man, this is not fun.
Yeah. So I'll say that question, I didn't make that up. That came from a book from Andy Stanley. What does love require me? That is a fun question to preach. Because you watch everybody go, oh, so deep.
Everybody starts writing it in their journals.
And then everyone's like, oh, I'm going to tell my husband about that. Or whatever it is, And then, but actually asking yourself that question, way harder. Mm-hmm. Way harder. Because as soon as you ask the question, you almost always know the answer. You're like, what does love require? I know what love requires. I was just hoping that somebody would come along and affirm my selfishness as not being selfishness.
Right. That question helps us shift away from legalism and actually move towards what it looks like to put into action loving God and loving each other. So, well, thank you for this conversation, Pastor Ryan, and I hope you guys are jumping in those comments. And once again, if you want to share this and get more people jumping in on this conversation, we would love for you to do that. Go ahead and send those questions in. We would love to know your thoughts on the matter, and go ahead and join us back here next week.
See ya.